Hi, this is video lecture 1, Writing a Proposal, and I'm going to walk you through the handout and resources that I've already made available for how you're going to create the proposal for your research project for this class. So this is the first step in a series of steps toward creating your final research paper. So here we are on the home page of our course. I'm going to go to Content. And you'll see, again, I think you're already familiar with this. What we're talking about is the work you're going to be doing in week 2, which is working on this proposal. So if you go to assignments, you'll see that I already have a handout in there about this proposal. So I want to start there and talk you through, again, the specifics of how to think about creating your proposal. So the handout is here, and I'll go ahead and open that up. Okay, here we go. So, like I said, this is the first step on your projects, and there's still a long way to go and a lot to sort out, but this is an important step because what you do for this proposal will set the framework and sort of lay the ground for everything that comes afterwards. So what you'll submit for the proposal is a fairly brief document, but I do want you to spend some time really thinking through your options so that you get off on a good start, particularly with a topic and an approach to that topic that is exciting and interesting to you and is something that you will be able to accomplish during the course of this one semester. Okay, so as we already discussed, we're going to be doing individual meetings on Thursday evenings. That means your assignments will always be due on the Wednesday before by 10 p.m. So in this case, for the proposal, that means it will be due on January 31st by 10 p.m. And that will give me time to look at it before we meet on Thursday evening. So what are you going to actually do or create for this proposal? There are 4 components to the document that you'll create. The first is to identify what is your topic. And as I say here on the handout, I want you to be as specific as possible. The way to think about this is, or one way to approach this, you may already have an idea in mind, which is great. But one way to approach it is to think about a couple of different things. One is, what are the issues that you have learned about or worked on in your courses as a global studies major at Northeastern that you found particularly interesting or things you want to work on more or learn more about, right? So it can be something that was generated by again, topics you were introduced to as part of your work as a student. You can also think of it in terms of, what do I want to do in my career after I graduate? Again, assuming that will be in some way global studies oriented. And can I spend some time this semester working on a subject that goes directly to what I want to do in the longer term, right? And it may be that there are things that are in both categories, right? Things that you've learned about in courses that you also want to be a part of, or even the focus of what you do in your career, okay? It can also be simply something that is happening in the world right now that seems especially important or pressing. It could be something you read a news story about, right? So there's lots of sources of inspiration that you can draw on. But again, what I encourage you to do is to think about multiple options and really try to land on something that is important and interesting and relevant to the contemporary world and that is doable in the time frame of one semester. So the first thing you're going to include in this document that is your proposal is a brief statement of what that topic is. And again, I encourage you to be as specific as possible, right? So don't say the global economy, right? That's way too vast. Don't say, politics or, the internet. Try to think of a specific part of that more general category that you can focus on, okay? All right, so that's part 1, your topic. The second thing you'll do is to articulate a research question. And again, the more specific you can be at this stage, the better. But I also know that it may be a little difficult to be specific. One thing that I suggest you might do in the case of the research question is to include more than one. That's perfectly reasonable. If you're trying to figure out what the best angle is on your topic and you have sort of a few ideas, feel free to list them all. This doesn't need to be the final definitive research question. This is a proposal, so we're still in the phase of sort of sorting out what the best thing is to do here, right? So So it can be one or it can be more than one, but I do want you to articulate in the form of a question what it is that you want to know or learn or argue about this topic you've identified. Okay, so actually pose it as a question, right? The idea with a research question is that you're trying to identify something, again, important, relevant, significant about your topic that deserves more work, right? Something we don't know yet about that topic, or we don't know enough about that topic. Again, think about not only the sort of more general parameters, but what is your approach, your angle, your specific corner of that subject that you want to pursue, okay? That's the second part of your proposal. The third part is to think about what data or evidence you want to try to collect and from where, okay? So there's sort of two things that you'll be drawing on as sources for this project. One is some kind of data source. Now, I understand that we have sort of a fairly short time frame. You're doing these projects in one semester. So I don't think that you're going to go, do 100 interviews across the world, right? Like, it has to be feasible. But I do want you to identify some kind of source of evidence or data that you can incorporate into your project. So I've given you a few examples here on the handout. Things like statistics that are publicly available on the internet that are provided by government agencies. You could do something like track social media posts, right? Again, on any social media platform. You could analyze media images, right? So in other words, it needs to be something that is accessible to you. If you need to visit, an archive that you can't get clearance for, then obviously, right, there's too many impediments to the way of doing that, even if it would be a fabulous source of data for your project. So think about things that are sort of readily available, particularly electronic sources of data. And there's a lot of that out there, right? Of course, we're going to want to make sure that those are sort of legitimate or credible sources of information, but we can figure that out as you start to bring things to me, and I can help you identify sort of where things come from. But again, there's lots of governmental and sort of international bodies that produce and post to the internet all kinds of statistical analyses of things in the world, many that have a sort of global framework. So think about that. Again, as part of the proposal, here we are sort of, to some extent, sort of brainstorming how you might do this. So again, feel free to throw out there several different potential sources of data or evidence that you might draw from. Again, being as specific as possible. So in other words, don't just say, government statistics. Include a link to a database or a document that I can check out and see what you mean, okay? So that's the third part of your proposal. And then the fourth part is to start to look at the published scholarship on your topic and include at least one peer-reviewed source relevant to what you plan to do, okay? So there's a couple things that are important about that. The first is that this needs to be a peer-reviewed scholarly source. So not simply like a news article or an opinion piece that you find on the internet, but something that was published in a scholarly venue. So to identify or to find that scholarly source, what that means is you're going to need to use the library's databases, okay? So don't just do a Google search because you will be unlikely to find appropriate sources that way. In a second, I'll show you some of the places you can look on the library's website to find those kinds of sources, okay? You're going to ultimately, for this project, find a lot more of these scholarly sources to use. The next assignment, in fact, is going to be to put together an annotated bibliography. For right now, I just want you to do an initial search and find at least one of these sources that can work for your project, okay? So it needs to be something that is the right kind of source, scholarly peer-reviewed, and also that links directly to what you are proposing you will do, okay? So you don't want to, again, just sort of take the first thing that comes up in your search, but look through the various things that are emerging as you look for things and use the search terms related to your project and try to find one that feels like it's a good fit with the direction you want the project to go, okay? That source, at least one, right, that you're going to put into the proposal, I'm also asking you to put that item in the citation style that you are going to be using for this project, which is Chicago Manual of Style author date format, okay? And again, I'll show you in a sec. I've also linked to the proposal, to the handout, a quick guide on what a Chicago Manual of Style author date citation looks like, what a bibliographic entry looks like. So you're going to make sure that you follow that format so that the information is, again, following that guideline, okay? Okay, so those are sort of the basics of what the proposal entails. So let me follow up now on those two things, particularly around finding sources, published sources that I mentioned, to make sure that you know where to look to find both information about what those things should look like and the sort of substance of those themselves, okay? Let's start with finding the sources in the library's databases. I've linked here to the sort of the general address for the Northeastern Library and also to the Global Studies Guide through our library, and both are really important places to look as you're starting a research project in global studies. Within the library resources, the many resources that you'll find on the library's website, I've also noted a couple of specific databases that you might turn to find your peer-reviewed sources. There are lots of other ones, but this is kind of just to get you going. So let me, just to give you an example, let me start by taking you to the library website and taking you to the Academic Search Ultimate database and showing you what that looks like to find a peer-reviewed source for your project. So we're going to start by going to the Northeastern Library website, which is this, right? You can find that either through Newport, or you can just go directly to the Northeastern website and go to the library. If you go through Newport, you'll find there's a little icon that shows library, and when you click on it, it'll take you directly here, okay? On this website, or on this homepage, there's a few different ways you can sort of get into the library's holdings. The one I'm going to suggest you start with is databases and articles, since I think, again, especially for an initial search like you're doing right now, you're going to want to look at the journal articles, which is where sort of the most recent sort of cutting-edge literature on any subject is going to be located, okay? So again, the one that I suggested you might start with, the database you might start with, is the Academic Search Ultimate. When you come to the databases list, it's in alphabetical order, right? So if you were looking for JSTOR, which is another one I mentioned, you'd hit the J and there it is, right? We're going to start with this Academic Search Ultimate, so it's right there in the beginning of the list. So when you pull it up, it's one of the first ones, okay? So we'll click on that database, and I need to log in again, which I will do. And that takes me to the search area, right? My first suggestion is whenever you're doing a search in one of these databases is to always just start with the advanced search. It gives you more options and allows you to tailor your search in a way that I think will be more effective and more useful for you. So like every other search, and I'm sure you've done either exactly this or something similar to this, you have these fields where you can put in terms, either a single term or multiple terms, right? And then you also have the option of being specific about sort of how you want that term to be read, right? Whether it's a subject or an author or a title. You can just leave it general, right, if you want. Over here is and, meaning every time you add a term, it makes your search more narrow, right? So in other words, if you put 3 terms, what you're bringing up then is items that have all 3 of those terms in them, right? If you put an or in here, which is another one of the options, right, then you'd be looking for things that have either one or the other, right? So it's a good approach to start with and, because that allows you to, again, narrow your search down to things that will be more likely to be relevant to your project, right? Okay. So just that's the first part, right? Is your search terms. The other things that you might want to think about checking off in this form, right? And again, you can just do a search, but the more you check off initially, the more specifically tailored what comes up will be, and that can serve you well because then you don't have to weed through a million different things, right? So for example, if you want to make sure that everything you bring up is something where you can access the article right there, like it's attached as a PDF or a link, then I would click full text, right? You don't want something where you then have to go find it in another journal. And the other thing you definitely want to do for the sake of this project is peer reviewed, right? We want to make sure that everything you're using for your project is peer reviewed. That is sort of the definition of a scholarly source, okay? So let's start with full text, peer reviewed, and I'm going to do, I'm going to make up a project here. So let's say I'm interested in global film. And it's, who knows, the politics involved, right? Let's see if we can find anything with that. So I've got my full text peer reviewed, and these are my search terms. And let's see what we come up with. Okay. So, here's a whole bunch of different things, right? I've got 11,000 hits, which is a lot. And as you'll find, as you start looking through what comes up when you do a search, some things are, even though I tried to be pretty specific with my search, some things are more relevant to what I want to do than others, right? So I'm still going to need to go through these and see really what is coming up and whether it's useful to me, right? So let's say I want to go to this and see if this is relevant to me. I've got the title already. I also have an abstract. So it can help me to read the abstract to know, is this really something that, that is along the lines of what I'm looking for. I can also open the PDF to see the complete article and get an even better sense. And obviously, if it is relevant to me, I'm going to want to either save this to my computer or save the citation or something else so I know I can return to it, right? So going back to our results then, right? So I've got all these, I can go through them and sort of figure which ones are the best. So if I want to further refine what I've come up with once I sort of see what has come up in the search, there's other things you can still do to even sort of weed out what you've got here. So if you go over to the refine results, which is a column on the left, you can see here there's one of the categories is limit to. So you've already got it limited to full text and peer review. There's an item here that says show more. So if I want to limit it even further, I could do something like, for example, a common one you might want to do is the publication date. Maybe I now think, this is all interesting, but I just want to see what the most recent publications are on this. Then I could go, let's say I only want to see what's been published since 2020, right, just for the last few years. Then I can put that range in, search again, and now I've got a much smaller pool of sources, and they're all very recent, okay? You can also sort of do the same thing with your original search by going, when it comes up, it typically comes up in terms of relevance. If you click on this and then go date newest, you'll also bring up the most recently published, right? It'll go in order from most recent to oldest, right? So again, these are just some ways to use a database and to try to sort of use the elements of this search engine to find something that's really suited to what you want to do, right? Okay, so let's go back to our handout then. So I've also included the Northeastern Library's Guide for Global Studies. That's another place to look. It also lists a bunch of the databases you might use. So consider using that link as well. So that's sort of one of the pieces of what I wanted to show you. The second is, as I mentioned, I want your sources, whether you do one or more than one, to follow the author date style, the Chicago Manual of Style author date style. So I've included a link to, the quick guide. This gives you, this is from the Chicago Manual of Style website, and it gives you examples, right? So, for example, if you want to, say you're doing journal articles, right? So you need to find the category of the thing that you're writing the citation for, in this case, a journal article. The way you would include that journal article in your reference list is detailed here, right? It also shows you how you will cite within the body of the paper, but we're not there yet. For right now, you're just creating a bibliographic entry, like the entry, the item that would go into the reference list at the end of the paper. So you're going to follow that guideline in terms of what your source that you include in your proposal looks like. Now, the other item that I included here is from a site called the Purdue OWL, which we'll be using throughout the semester, which has a lot of useful resources for doing research papers. It gives you even more information about using this particular citation style, and it also gives you a sample paper, which is super useful. Again, this is more for your information right now. You'll be using this a lot more as we get into the course. For now, I think it's enough to use the quick guide just to make sure you're following the right format for the entry for the source that you include in your proposal, okay? So again, this is just step one, but it's a very important step, so I want you to take some time to work on these things. You'll be submitting your document, right, which is going to be either a Word doc or a PDF, to the appropriate folder in D2L by Wednesday night at 10 p.m., the night before we have our meetings on Thursday. And just make sure you've followed this handout carefully and that you've completed all the components of the handout. Again, I'm very open to you including multiple options. If you're thinking about two different potential topics and you're not sure which one is the best choice, feel free to add that into the proposal, right? You can do sort of two versions or two proposals for two different topics, and we can talk about both of them. But again, the goal is to thoroughly complete all the components of the proposal, because that'll give us enough information to really talk about what this project would look like, and also to be able to tweak it if we need to in terms of either making it broader or more specific, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really looking forward to seeing your initial thoughts on what you might like to do your research projects on. So good luck on the proposal, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.